Yo!
As they passed the fountain, heading toward the stairs, a voice called out to them. They turned to see Motomi, the information broker that met at the club yesterday. Akira had thought that maybe the darkness of the club was what had made him seem so scruffy and worn, but the light of day only confirmed Akira's initial assessment.
Motomi-san だっけ?
Keisuke, who had been pale since witnessing that gory match, smiled in relief, a familiar face.
イグラに参加するってんなら今日は多分ここに来るだろうと思ってな。用事のついでに立ち寄ったんだが、ナイスタイミングだったな。
Motomi's grin widened. He hadn't removed his cigarette.
ずいぶんヘビースモーカーだな、あんた。
Akira cast a look at Motomi's feet, where at least half a dozen cigarette stubs were scattered on the ground. Far too many for Akira to believe that this meeting was anything but plain.
まあな。
Motomi shrugged, letting Akira's biting tone slide off him like water.
これから中に入るんだろ。俺もついてっていいか。
何か用があるのか？
あの悪趣味っぷりを久々に拝みたくってな。
Indeed, the palace decor was impossible to forget. But Akira couldn't shake the feeling that Motomi had some other purpose. Did he just like involving himself in other people's business? Or was he looking for some information? Akira and Keisuke were new here. Maybe he saw in them the potential for new leads.
正直、ちょっと心強いです。
Keisuke said with an innocent smile.
そう言ってもらえると来た甲斐があるね。
As always, Keisuke's usual lack of guile was jarring, but Akira had written it off as a lost cause. Keisuke would never change.
とりあえず中入らないか。さっきから警備員がおっかない目で睨んでるぜ。
Indeed, Akira could feel the sharp stares boring into him. At Motomi's urging, the three of them walked up to the entrance. Once inside, they were ushered down the hallway in exactly the same manner as before. Granted, this was only Akira's second time, but the decor still packed quite a punch. The sculptures of young boys, in particular, would no doubt make his skin crawl no matter how many times he saw them. But Keisuke put on one of the masks meant for new registrants. Motomi blinked at him and scratched his head, a wry smile playing about his lips.
ああ、登録者はそれつけるんだったっけな。まあ、なんつうか、あいつらしいけどな。
あいつ？
アルビトロ様だ。
Motomi grimaced.
趣味が悪すぎるんだよ、ここは。禁煙だし。
Even as he said it, Motomi was lighting a cigarette. He tisked irritably as he surveyed the interior. A guard appeared to guide the three of them onward. Midway down the main foyer, the guard had to stop to scold Motomi for kicking one of the naked boy statues. As before, the hallway ended in a set of black doors, chained shut. What was behind those doors? Nothing good, Akira was certain. Keisuke stiffed slightly when the waiting room door swung open. There were several masked men inside, the same as there had been yesterday.
緊張してどうする？参加するって決めたんだろ。決めたからには行ってこい。
ああ。
His words harsh, but his tone kind. Motomi pat Keisuke on the shoulder a couple of times. Keisuke's hands were at his sides, his fingertips trembling faintly.
それじゃあ。
With a strange smile, Keisuke looked first at Motomi, then at Akira. Akira met his gaze in silence. Abruptly, Keisuke turned away as if to shake himself free of some clinging doubt, then vanished into the room. The door closed and silence descended. Now that it was too late, Akira found himself wondering if Keisuke would become a burden. At the same time, he knew that he'd all but accepted Keisuke's choice the moment he'd given up trying to dissuade him. All he could do now was produce results regardless. The sound of footsteps snapped Akira out of his thoughts. The master of the spells was approaching. Sensing an abrupt shift in the atmosphere, Akira peeked at Motomi's profile and saw that his forehead was deeply furrowed. He was making no effort to hide his repulsion.
おや、君は昨日も来てくれた。
Arbiter smiled suggestively at Akira, but turned pale the instant he spotted Motomi standing nearby.
お前、
久しぶりだな。
Clearly, there was no love lost between these two.
一体何の用だ？
見回りだよ。じゃないと何するかわからんからな、お前は。
余計なお世話だ。
Akira could see the corners of Arbiter's eyes twitching behind his mask. Motomi, meanwhile, curled his lips into sneer.
それにしても、悪趣味ぶりは相も変わらず健在だな。ここまで来ると一層惚れ惚れするぜ。
うるさい！お前に私の美意識を迫害する権利などない！
権利があろうとなかろうとんなことは関係ない。お前の指図は受けないさ。
Arbiter clenched his jaw tight, quivering, then slashed his arm through the air between them like a sword.
もう二度とここへは来るな。汚れる。
お前が用いとマシになりゃな。
失礼する。
Arbitra stomped off toward the waiting room. His men followed behind him. After the door had closed, Motomi exhaled deeply.
知り合いなのか？
まあ、ちょっとな。
Motomi refused to meet Akira's eyes clearly. He didn't want to give a straight answer. His expression was difficult to read. His brows drawn together ever so slightly.
お前さんも気ぃつけた方がいいかもな。ちょいと気になってるみたいだからな。
気になってる？
処刑人に会ったんなら見たんじゃないのか、犬を。
Akira immediately recalled the boy in black bondage gear.
あいつは小綺麗な顔の少年をいたぶるのが大好きなんだよ。まあ、メインは年派もいかねえようなのだから大丈夫だとは思うが、一応な。
The thought made his blood go cold. He'd never imagined himself becoming a target in that sense. Robbie chuckled at Akira's reaction.
そりゃ、あの扉の向こうに何があるか知ってるか？
He jerked his chin toward the end of the corridor, where the black door stood wrapped in chains.
いや、
あの奥はな、コロシアムになってるんだ。
コロシアム？
そう、闘技場だ。イルレと戦うためのな。
イルレとは戦うための。
Motome threw Akira a sideways glance that he ignored of his reaction.
挑戦者なんざそうそういるもんじゃないからな。普段はああやって麻薬王との神聖なる決闘場を厳重に閉ざしてるってわけよ。
Suddenly, Akira's heart was racing. Behind that ferry door was the place Ilray slew his challengers.
イルレの試合があるときはここは一般開放される。イルレと挑戦者の直接対決は非公開だが、その前に余興が行われる。まあ、あの悪趣味男の演出だからたかが知れてるけどな。
For what Motomi was saying, it sounded as though Arbitro ran Igra. Akira had assumed that was Ilray's role.
さて、そろそろ終わるんじゃないか。
Motomi let out a brief sigh as he glanced at the waiting room door. Just then, the door opened and Arbitro emerged. Though he bade farewell to the registrants with a gracious smile, the instant he saw Motomi, his face contorted into a hysterical grimace.
まだいたのか、お前。
登録者の付き添いだ。心配せんでもすぐに出てくさ。
He shot Motomi a sharp glare before rushing off down the hall, his regal composure forgotten. Motomi watched him go, then shrugged and turned to Akira. Just like last time, the registrants began leaving the room at 10-minute intervals. Kesuke was the third to come out. This time, a tag hung securely around his neck.
お待たせ。
Mask in hand, Kesuke smiled at a tad wearily.
待たされた待たされた。でも仮面取っちまったのか。
Keisuke looked down at the mask in his hand, as if he had only just realized.
なんか馴染まないし、無意識に取っちゃってた。
まあ馴染めって方が無理な話だけどな。さっきも嫌な野郎に会っちまったしよ。
嫌な野郎？
そう、嫌な野郎だ。
そうなのか。
Blinking as though he didn't quite get it, Keisuke turned to look at Akira. Not knowing how to respond, Akira looked away. Shock flickered over Keisuke's face. Then he looked down, biting his lip.
アキラ、まったく気の利かんやつだな。もっと大人になれや。
Motomi, who had been watching from the sidelines, sighed and shook his head.
いや、いいんだ。もともとアキラは俺が参加することには反対してたし。
Keisuke smiled, obviously forced. Motomi's expression was thoughtful as he glanced between the two. 10 minutes went by before they knew it. The fourth registrant to leave the room gave Akira and the others a glare as he passed.
そろそろ退散しとっかね。
They followed Motomi back to the entrance, where they handed Keisuke's mask to a guard, then left the palace. Keisuke paused, his chest swelling as he drank his fill of the chilly air. Though his face was still shadowed by worry, Akira thought it also held a new confidence. It was the face of a man who was set on his course.
シャバの空気はうまいか。
Motomi spoke jokingly. Raising his eyebrows, Keisuke smiled awkwardly and lowered his eyes a bit.
どうかな。
They stood there a little while longer, looking out at a slice of Toshima visible from the palace. Suddenly, Motomi started patting his pockets.
なんだよ。
タバコが切れやがって。
Motomi tusked and scratched his hair irritably while heading down the stairs. Akira and Keisuke followed behind him. When he reached the bottom, Motomi turned back.
さーて、おいちゃんは用事があるからな。ここでバイバイだ。タバコも買わんといかんからな。
ありがとうございました。
Keisuke's polite bow drew a deep laugh from the older man.
ねえ、なんかいらないって。何もしてないからな。それより、こっからが大変だぞ。
Keisuke accepted Motomi's warning with a solemn nod.
そんじゃあまあ、またな。
Motomi raised a hand in a farewell, then ambled off down the road. After he vanished from sight, Akira turned to Keisuke.
タグ見せてくれ。
ああ、うん。
Keisuke pulled four tags from his coverall pockets.
首に下げてるやつがスペードのエース。あとは使えないやつが4枚。7、3、5、8かな。
エースか。
有効な札が1枚しかない。
いや、十分だろ。
On the whole, one probably had a greater chance of not receiving any significant tags. After stashing the bundle safely in his pocket, Keisuke stretched and looked up at the sky.
イグラか。
As though drawn in by Keisuke's murmur, Akira looked up as well. The murky boundary between sky and clouds seemed to reflect his feelings perfectly. There was no turning back now. Neither he nor Keisuke could leave Toshima until he defeated Ilrei. Something was wrong. Shortly after leaving the palace behind, Akira stopped and looked over his shoulder.
どうした？
いや、
Since parting ways with Motomi, Akira had felt like he was being watched, but perhaps it was only his mind playing tricks on him. He scanned the shadows and what he could see of the nearby alleyways, but couldn't pick out anything resembling a human shape. When he'd first arrived in Toshima, it felt as if people were lurking in every nook and cranny, but little by little, he was learning to distinguish empty alleys from those that hid potential threats. Still, he could never be sure.
疲れてるんじゃないのか？ちゃんと寝た？昨日。
Akira was a light sleeper. Most nights, he spent drifting along the border between sleep and wakefulness. Perhaps he had worn himself out without realizing it. One's body and spirit rarely functions in perfect sync. For the moment, he could only press onward. His mind hadn't been playing tricks on him. For a split second, a different noise interrupted the sound of their footsteps. When he turned to see what was behind him, Keisuke suddenly vanished from sight. Akira turned. There he was, in the inky shadows that filled the gap between two buildings. Somebody was holding his arms behind his back. The first thing Akira saw was blue hair, then a garish yellow scarf and a fleshy shirt. Finally, he noticed the man's skin-tight motorcycle jacket and eye patch. At first glance, despite his exotic appearance, he looked like any other wayward youth. But his eyes shone like those of a starving wolf, and a silver tag hung on his chest. As Keisuke struggled to pry the arm from his neck, the man drew his blade and pressed it to his cheek. The blade was shaped like machete, large enough to split Keisuke's skull with ease.
あんまり暴れんなよ。怪我するぜ。
The man spoke in a hoarse, breathy voice, almost a whisper, without taking his eyes off Akira.
たぐ、もうほら、いっと。
There was a dull, metallic sound as he ripped the tag away from Keisuke's neck. As far as Akira understood it, Igra duels were meant to be fair. An ambush like this had to be against the rules. Akira had thought it strange, at first, that such rules could function in a city like this. But that was until he'd witnessed the brutality of the man charged with punishing offenders.
処刑人が喜んで飛びつきそうなやり方だな。
関係ねえな。あいつらは違反者だろうとそうじゃなかろうと、殺したいと思った時に殺すんだよ。だったらルールを守る必要なんてねえじゃねえか。
He snorted derisively and glanced at the tag he'd taken. This needed to end, and fast, before the executioners showed up. The last thing Akira wanted was to risk another encounter with those two, especially know that their dog had the scent of his tags. Akira chucked his bag aside and reached for the knife at his waist. Just as his hand closed around the hilt, the man let out a yelp. His face twisted in pain. Keisuke had beaten down on the arm throttling his neck. Eyes dark with anger, the man held Keisuke fast.
この野郎死ね
The man raised his knife for the killing blow. That was when Akira charged him. Akira caught the man with a full body tackle, dragging him to the ground with his knife still high above his head.
Akira! てめえこの野郎
Akira straddled the man and attempted to pin his arms down, but his enemy was putting up a fight. Their arms shook with the strain of their struggle, sparks flying between their locked ties.
どけ
The man hauled, kneeing Akira in the stomach. Akira let the blow push him to his feet, then leaped back and drew his knife. The man rose slowly, smirking when he saw what Akira was holding.
そう来なくっちゃな
Wrapping the chain of his stolen tag around his wrist, he beckoned to Akira with the tip of his knife. Akira studied the man silently. His moves were crude, but he clearly matched Akira in strength.
おいおい固まっちまったのかだったらこっちから行かせてもらうぜ
The man dropped his hips and charged. A gust of wind hauled past Akira's ear, the weight of the enemy's blade and bloodlust whipping the air into a frenzy. Even though Akira had dodged the strike, its passage left his cheeks stinging. Before the man could recover from his missed attack, Akira thrust upward at his stomach. The man was more agile than he looked. He pulled back swiftly, then lunged forward with another swing of his blade. It was tough to calculate the right timing. Although the enemy's weapon was long and his attacks bold, he was also quick to recover and left no opening large enough for Akira to exploit. Panting breath, flashing blades, their feet beat out an irregular rhythm. The street was silent, but for the sounds of their struggle.
うら
With a shout, the man took a long step forward and delivered a horizontal slash. Their blades met with a bone-jarring force. Akira felt his fingers go numb, but he managed to kill his opponent's momentum.
結構やるなお前
The two men were close enough to feel each other's breath. Beyond the crow's blades, Akira saw a fearless smile play on his enemy's lips. Unlike Akira, whose natural talents for exploiting his enemy's vulnerabilities made his movements smooth and precise, the other man's attacks were crude and unrefined. At the same time, however, he clearly knew how to use his raw strength to the fullest. A silver cross hung next to his tag, reflecting a dual light. The man roared, pushing Akira back. The cross had distracted him, and his response was slowed. His enemy struck for a kill.
Akira!
The blade approached, filling his sight. Just before it could reach him, Akira extended his right hand and slashed at the man's chest. Something hard caught at the tip of his knife. The man froze, his eyes open wide. Akira's blade hadn't touched his flesh. Instead, it had snagged down the man's stag and cross, snapping their chains in the blink of an eye. The links filled the air with a sound like falling glass, transforming onto silver crystals as they scattered. All three men on the scene stood petrified as one. Their eyes went to where the stag lay fallen beside the cross. The cross was plain, the size of the child's palm, the surface scratched and worn. The man seemed dazed. He hardly noticed when Akira cut Keisuke's stag free from his wrist. Little by little, however, his gaze shifted from the cross back to Akira, and his face contorted with rage. Raw hate burned in his eyes. Akira struggled not to flinch back in terror. Was he only now reacting to the loss of the stolen tag? But the man made no move to resume the fight. Instead, his knife sagged as he lowered his hand, his lips still tight with anger. He knelt to retrieve his cross from the ground. He raised it slowly to his face and stared at it intently. For an instant, a shadow of sadness seemed to flicker in his eyes. Then he closed his fist around the cross and bowed his head, a pious gesture, as if sending up a prayer. Akira could hardly believe that this was the same man who had been trying to kill him a moment ago. The next time the man opened his eyes, he abruptly slashed at Akira with all of his strength. Once again, Akira managed to stop the attack with his own knife. The screech of metal filled the air. With a frustrated shout, the man jumped back. After giving Akira a long glare, he spun and took off running. Akira watched him vanish down the street. He felt deflated, like the victim of a joke. Why had the man abandoned the fight? There was no question he'd wanted Akira dead. But no, it hardly mattered. This hadn't been a legitimate fight to begin with. Whatever happened, it was no fault of Akira's. As Akira turned back to Keisuke, a flash of metal on the ground caught his eye. The man's tag. He must have forgotten it in his rage. Had the cross truly meant that much to him? The tag was 10. Together with Akira's check, it made the beginnings of a streak. But something, the memory of the man's spirit glare, made Akira reluctant to add it to his collection. Instead, he tucked it into his jacket pocket. He will stay there for the moment.
Akira.
Keisuke was looking at him like a remorseful puppy.
ほら、
He retrieved Keisuke's backpack and tossed it to him, together with his salvage tag.
アキラ、ごめんな。
あっちが悪い。ルール違反だろ。
Akira picked up his own bag, then rubbed his cheek, but the sensation of the knife's closed passage still lingered. Keisuke lowered his eyes in shame.
アキラはほんとすごいよな。俺結局何もできなくて。